How do you find happiness when life isn't great? Life has all kinds of ups and downs, right? It goes to extremes. There are days where we just can't seem to get our footing. And it's kind of one of those things of going, all right, what does it take to be happy? But before we can really dig into it, we probably need to understand the definition of happiness. And Merriam-Webster gives it as this: a state of well-being and contentment, a pleasurable or satisfying experience. All right, so take the first part of that, a state of well-being and contentment. And so how do we begin to put ourselves in a state of well-being and contentment? The Dalai Lama says that happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions. So if we're thinking about that, if we're looking for self-contentment, if we're looking for, okay, it's based upon our actions, what we do, it's not based upon the situation, the outside forces, but instead how we respond with words and actions to everything around us. Proverbs 22:9 gives us some perspective on really digging into, all right, if it's based upon what we do, if it is all about being content and of having this state of well-being, then what can move us into a place of happiness? So Proverbs 22:9 says, happy are generous people because they give some of their food to the poor. All right, happy are generous people. And in this instance, when they give food to the poor, when they give food to someone who is lacking in that. And we can broaden that out because there are so many things in life we can be generous with. We can be generous with a smile, with kind words, with our time, with being willing to show up, with listening. We can be generous with more than just one thing. And so to begin to think about all the ways that we can be generous on an everyday basis in the simplest of ways to things that are much bigger, of how are we generous with our time? How are we generous with our presence? How are we generous with the things that we are able to do to give to someone else that maybe they're struggling with? Maybe they really need that smile. Maybe they really need that encouragement. Maybe they really need you to show up for them. And so how do we begin to be generous with those things and being tuned into that? Eleanor Roosevelt says, happiness is not a goal. It is a byproduct. So this whole sense of how are we generous with our life, that then the happiness will come when we get focused on how we can be generous with others. And so as we're thinking about all the different ways that you can be generous, that all of us can be generous with others, Thomas Merton says this: happiness is not a matter of intensity, but of balance, order, rhythm, and harmony. Practicing generosity, it's one of those things, like it's done in such a way. I mean, his words there of, it's not a matter of intensity, but of balance, order, rhythm, and harmony. And so when we're practicing generosity, it becomes part of our rhythm. It just becomes part of the order of our day. So it may not necessarily be intense, but instead it just becomes another element of who we are, and that will generate happiness. Our words and our actions, the way that we are generous with others. Pray with me. Gracious God, you are constantly surrounding us with an abundance of love, of hope, of joy, and wisdom. We ask for perspective and guidance as we try and navigate what it means to find happiness in our lives, no matter our circumstances. Help us to cultivate a life that knows contentment and figures out how to be generous in a multitude of ways. May our words and actions be generous today, tomorrow, and throughout all of our days. Amen.